I'm Camilla Di Giuseppe, and joining me today is Douglas Vermeeren. You are the multi-talent, you are the stuntman, you are the actor, you're the director, you're the producer, and you're also working on a new project called 1912. So we're going back about 110 years in time. So how did you come up with the premise of recreating 1912?
You know, we're going to call it actually recreating 1912 because that's really the goal. So here's the deal: is I'm a big movie buff, and I have been since I was born probably. And maybe something that's a little bit different than most movie buffs is I really, really love the old vintage stuff that even the silent movie era. If we look at people like Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd and some of these people, they did all their own stunts. They were so innovative in creating the projects that they did that I wanted to see if I could do it too. And using today's technology, but to create something that looks like it's retro, that it's vintage, that it might have even been filmed in 1912. And so thank goodness, like in our city, like I'm from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, as you know, and we've got a historical village that is all mapped out and set with the old buildings, the old vehicles, the old cars and all that stuff. And so I want to see if I can do it, right? Recreate 1912.
And that's an interesting idea, recreating something that's part of our past, but also has integral piece in, I guess, kind of like the beginning of film.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you say that because I look at right now, even in our world, we've got a very similar kind of innovative spirit that when film first came out. So when film first came out, these guys were having to invent, how do we frame these pictures? Because you remember, photography had just barely come out. And now we're on to motion picture. So there's a really, late 1800s, we see that photography is, and these daguerreotypes and things have just now started, but now we've got motion picture in the early 1900s. And so everybody was like, how do we use these new tools and technologies to create, really interesting films and things that people will watch? And so there's everything from lighting to makeup to costuming to stunt work to, filming on locations to filming in studios to matte paintings and backgrounds and all the things that they could do. It was just, the world was on fire. But we also have that kind of now because now we've got all the new innovations in CGI and computer technology, and heck, you can shoot a full movie on your phone. There's been guys that have done their features already, even on an Apple phone and all of these things. So I think it's kind of timely to now retroactively go back to this creative part because we're experiencing that renaissance again, if you will. And I want to see, again, it's an experiment, right? I want to see, can we really create something that has that same sort of magical energy that they had back then, but do it again right now. Technology.
Yeah. Obviously, you're using current technology to bring a period piece to life. How is that? How do you do that?
It's interesting because a lot of times, people are looking at how do I think outside the box to do these things? And we're actually taking a different approach. We're actually finding a new box to think inside, but really the old box, the one that they used before. So we've got to consider such things as frame rate on the film. Now, you might remember when you're watching old silent movies, it looks like people are moving a little faster. Sometimes there's a bit of a, for lack of a better term, a jittery kind of skittish about the way that they move. So we've got to be able to create and duplicate that. Obviously we've even got such thing as aged film. Even back then, what's interesting, and maybe I'm getting too technical and bizarre with this answer, but if you look at even the way that films were edited back then, it's got non-fluid editing. It doesn't seem like it flows smoothly. Some of the jump cuts are a little bit jarring. Sometimes even the lighting, you'll know it creates almost like a vignette effect, so there's not a consistency in lighting that's through there. So the film, the way that it went through the cameras, oftentimes the sprockets for the film wouldn't always line up perfectly, and so you'd have some of these elements would come in. Well, how do you create that on technology that's like so perfect that you lose any kind of rawness about it? And then the other thing that I think is, we talk about the in-camera work, but the practical or the stuff that's happening on set, I'm going to be doing some of the stunt work. And the thing that's interesting about those stunts is, they didn't use safety nets. They didn't use, wire gags the same way they do now. And there's a few stunts that, I'll be honest, I'm a little worried about it. Like, not to the point of terrified, but it's like, I got to really think through how I'm going to pull that off and do it in one take. Right? Because that's the other thing is they didn't do the resets like we do now.
That's right. So when you are talking about these stunts, for example, give us a couple examples of what we will be seeing.
Well, the one that's got me thinking a lot okay? Because I have to work out the timing in it. There's one stunt in it where I have 3 vehicles that 2 of them are heading one direction, 1 of them is heading the other way. And as they line up somewhat, I've got to step across to each of the vehicles to get to the other side of a road as they're in motion and moving. And so obviously there's a lot of rehearsals that I'll be doing. I'll be first doing it with static placement markers. I'll be using 2x4s that I got to step from 2x4 to 2x4 that have the exact measurements of the top of that vehicle. And so I'll have to step across. And then what I'll do is I'll then shift to real vehicles and we'll start moving faster and faster and faster until we're up to speed. So I don't know how many times I'll have to do that stunt to practice it, but I would imagine it's going to be at least a dozen or 2 dozen to get that. And then I have to admit there's one little cheat that I am going to do. Like obviously back then, the shoes and things that people wore, often they had leather soles and things. Well, I'm a little nervous that's going to be kind of slippery to walk across the top of cars. So I may cheat a little bit and have a custom shoe design that's got a rubber sole on it, more like a runner, because it's like a sneaker, because it's a little bit easier to do that kind of thing in this. So there'll be some things that we've got to tweak, but we'll see what happens.
And just to make it perfectly clear, is this a silent film?
Yes, it will be a silent film with, again, the sort of ragtime piano soundtrack that we have, and I've got a friend that's actually building that, so it will be custom to us. By the way, that's one thing that is kind of interesting about film. When I was going to film school, I'll never forget that the teacher there talked about the importance of sound. We can mess up the imagery, we can even use something that's creative and people will get away with that, but if the sound isn't right in a film, people are right away like, oh yeah, they made a mistake, it's a cheap budget. The film, you know, the sound gives everything away. So with this, we're actually not recording sound on location, the same as they did in the old films, so it's all gonna flow with remember the cards that would come up and they'd be title cards that would say things and then the music that's in there, and so it'll be a feature, again, exactly in that same way.
So you, as authentic as possible to, I guess, marry the whole project together.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited because it's crazy. I get to dress like Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton for a while. They're going to do my makeup, you know, with the darker lips, and the men had their eyes darkened and all these kind of things. And then, of course, I've got to learn the movements and the motion that kind of captures that era as well. Remember, they've got kind of that, I don't want to call it a penguin walk, but a little bit of a penguin walk, you know, playing with the bowler hats and the way that they moved. And so I've got to learn all those mannerisms so that it blends seamlessly to look like 1912.
Okay, so you got a lot going on here. Like there's so much happening here because you're talking about the technical side, you're talking about the way it's going to look, the way it sounds, especially if it's a silent film, the way it sounds is so, the sound, the music is so much more important because of the sensory journey, right?
Yeah.
Because you're watching and you're listening. So what challenges have you encountered so far?
Well, you know, speaking of sound, one of the things that I'm grateful is not my job, is to come up with a soundtrack that's also of that era, to be able to compose that music, right? So I'm thankful that someone else is doing that. But I think for me, the things that have really been a lot of effort and a lot of focus is learning everything from the lighting techniques that they used, the framing techniques and composition that they used, because in modern filmmaking, they use something called the rule of thirds, where they you know, split the screen into 9 boxes, and then there's different points that on those that, you know, we're directing our film there. There's also such things as close-ups, medium shots, long shots, over-the-shoulder shots, all these things. They didn't use those back then. So I've got to find a way to keep everyone's attention by using the same composition of what they used to do. And then, of course, we talk again about the stunts and the acting in the film as well. So there's a lot to sort out. It's exciting, though.
And I would imagine that it is, because it's such a challenge, because something that you've never done before, I'm assuming. Correct,
yeah. No, I've never done, I mean, my first film that I did, the Opus, was vintage. Like it took place around, you know, 1930s or whatever. And we're going back to the same locations that we shot that. But with that, we still were shooting in color. We used sound. We were, you know, framing contemporary compositions. And so it's, boy, I keep going further back in time. What's my next movie? It's going to be like, I don't know, dinosaurs and the Crusades or something, or who knows, right? Like, it could be funny. But yeah, this is one step further back even than where we've been.
So recreating 1912 means you are literally in that time period. So how about the props and like set pieces? How do you acquire those things? And was it tricky to acquire? Like, where do you go? Do you go to eBay?
It is tricky.
Do you go to garage sales?
Yeah, well, you know what? Honestly, I think first of all, you need to make your prop list of what you're really going to need, and a lot of it we are trying to find, but that's really tough. So whatever we can't find, we have to create. And thank goodness, like in Calgary, Heritage Park and the Glenbow Association and other people like this have got lots of photo references for us, but sometimes they even have the real props. Now, obviously, they don't want them going out on a movie set to be damaged, so sometimes we can look at a real prop and then try to recreate it, or find something that can be modified, something that's maybe a little bit newer, but we can modify it so that it has that vintage look. And thank goodness we're shooting on black and white, so sometimes we can get away with some things. But the thing that I always kind of want to be careful about doing, and I've done a few movies like this in the past where I've been an actor in them, especially if you're doing like military movies or something, or cowboy movies, you got these guys that at home, they're like, oh, that's not the right gun for that era, or that's not the right costume for those soldiers, or that. I want to make it so that those people also have an enjoyable experience. So when they look at this film, they're like, was this shot in 1912? Like, everything is perfect, it's right. And they can't tell. So that's the goal, but
that's a challenge.
We'll see. It is a big challenge. Yeah, it is a big challenge.
Because you are right. There are people out there who are looking for every single detail about what is, because it's like even like continuity, right? Sometimes you see someone picking up a coffee mug and they're sipping it. Next thing the mug's gone, and the next shot. Like
or even then, like I was just watching this show that was supposed to be shot in the 1970s, and to use your example, for example, I saw a few times where they do something like take the coffee mug and then they'd set it down, and half the pens that are inside that little cup weren't invented till 1985 or something like that, right? And so you got people, like I'm not one of those people, but you've got people that'll be like, oh yeah, you just wrecked this whole movie for me because a pen's from 1985, it should be 1970. Well, first of all, if that wrecked the movie for you, I feel really bad. You're not paying attention to the story, but I don't want to be that guy to create that experience. I want this to be authentic. I want it to be, you're lost in that world, right?
Is there, okay, so just keeping with the props theme here, is there a prop that you've acquired or like a piece de resistance that you really want or have acquired?
Well, yeah, we're accumulating a lot of things that are like that, but my favorites, I have to confess, are the cars. Like the old Model Ts and these cars from the early 1900s and stuff, the Studebaker and all these things, like that's neat stuff. And some of the people that have restored those cars, man, they've done such an incredible job. They've done all the research, and some of the parts and pieces have been custom made, and so they look exactly in the day. And if you've never driven one of those old cars, it's kind of fun because, I don't know, meet, it's super fun, right? Like just cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, I guess kind of to round it up, it's like, this is a testament of taking the technology that we have today to be able to do something quite like this. What does it say about where we are today as far as technology goes? And what does it tell people out there who are trying to think into a different box?
Yeah, well, I think maybe the first thing that I realized from the technology point of view is how much today we take for granted what we really have, right? We have come so far, so fast, not just with motion pictures and the ability to produce, films and images, but just everything in our world. And I think that it's very, very easy if, we don't take a look back to see kind of what we really have. And so, I don't know, I know for me anyways, it's been an eye-opener to see, how long and how difficult it was to set up some of this, but nowadays it's just like, you take your phone and you can shoot it, right? Everybody's carrying a studio in their pocket. And so I think that's been a really big lesson. And I think that, I don't know. I mean, I think I have developed a greater desire to learn how to use the technology that I've been blessed with. See what happens, right? I mean, next film after this, who knows? Maybe we'll go to the future and see what we can guess what that would be like. That'd be interesting too.
Totally. So I have a question, and this I don't know. Films from that period, were they long films? Like usually a general film is about 90 minutes, 2 hours. Were
actually
they
most of them
long?
weren't. Yeah, in fact, it's funny. When film first started, generally speaking, it was a clip that was about 3 seconds long that you'd watch again and again and again and again and again until you got your nickel's worth, and then you're out, right? But if we're getting into the eras now with Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd and these guys, some of those films were around 20 minutes. And when you'd go to the cinema to see them, they'd show 3 or 4 of them. And then there were some that were as long as 45 minutes, and many of them were not longer than that. So that was kind of the status quo of that. So we'll probably be aiming for, in those time ranges as well. In fact, one of the ideas that we are still fooling around with is we may actually do 2 mini featurettes, so that there'd be 2 20-minute ones back to back with different stories. I think they're maybe a bit punchier to do it that way, instead of giving somebody a 90-minute feature that's quiet and slower moving in points maybe, or whatever, right? So if we just give it to them a little harder, I think we've got something better there. So, but that's a great question.
So, and again, a follow-up here is that the genre, if you're not too familiar with the genre, would they, again, in contemporary terms, are they considered, slapstick is obviously, but would it be comedy? Would it be action? Like, how do you describe it in
this is an
today?
interesting thing too. Now, if we're going to like the history of cinema, the genres as we know them today didn't really exist back then, right? So yes, they'd have cowboys in them sometimes, or they'd have people who would be the Keystone Cops or a bank robbery or things like that. But now I think we're a lot more clear with genres and subgenres. In fact, even if you pick horror, within horror you've got zombie, and then you've got certain kind of zombies, and then blah blah blah, and you can go all the way down. But they never had that kind of stuff. So I think back then, people were, I don't want to say flying by the seat of their pants, but maybe even like small independent filmmakers today, they generally would look at, what do I have access to in terms of props, material, locations, actors, blah, 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 blah. And they'd sort of start with that first, and then they'd make the movie from there. And so this particular genre, what we're doing for Recreating 1912, I'd say we've got a little bit of a romance going on. So I don't want to give too much about that, but there is a romance, because there's always a love story in a lot of the silent films, but there's also drama. And I will talk a little bit about this. One of the segments, my character is mistaken for a bank robber. Yeah, and while he's at the bank, he happens to fall in love with the teller. And so it starts getting complex and things of that nature. But that's kind of the genre that we're aiming for, of the, I don't know how we would call it, maybe a nondescript sort of comedy / action type film, I guess. And then of course back then everybody wanted to see the stunts, like they do today.
Yes, they
Stunts
do.
have always been the highlight of film.
When you don't have dialogue, and it's based on just the movement, and we're so used to seeing things move so fast to keep people drawn in into a film that's 2 hours, some of them 2-3 hours. Is there a challenge here? Because attention spans, number one, where we are with social media and everything, like 10-second reels and whatnot. But this is just silent, and it's just watching. Like,
action. And how do you create an action that, first of all, can be understood to an audience that's just observing, right? And another thought that came into my mind is, we went from making these short films to, even in the 50s and 60s, a lot more of these long epics that even had an intermission in them. Like if you watch a show like Giant or The Sand Pebbles with, Steve McQueen and stuff, they have an intermission in the film. We don't really do that anymore, right? It's been a long time since we've seen movies like that. So there are challenges and things that have changed in cinema over time based on the audience, the viewers. And I think we notice some changes happening again. Like I don't know, I'm maybe predicting the future, maybe I'm not. But if we look at the streaming services, and Walking Dead just ended. And I was a big fan of Walking Dead. They did 177 episodes, each one of them on average about 45 minutes. So if you think of it, that's almost like about 170 hours of film. So that could never be a feature film. But if we take these bite-sized clips that now have a cliffhanger at the end of every one, that's something that now becomes a serial, a reoccurring. That's kind of the trend that we watch, and we generally will watch those at home, not in a theater, so we can pause, stop, go make some popcorn, hit the bathroom, blah, blah, blah. They're also moving at such a way that I guarantee that as that's going on, somebody's got their social media open and they're on their phone, but they're also still dialed in. So our attention is split between them all. So I think the way that entertainment is changing is we're seeing more of this super long format divided into digestible pieces versus seeing a 2-hour movie. And let's be honest, I mean, we could talk for a while on this. COVID has changed the movie business. Everyone's better at watching at home than they are in a theater. And I think we're gonna see a lot less theater or theatrical releases coming, which breaks my heart because I love the theaters. I mean, honestly, if I ever get knocked out and I'm in a coma, you're gonna have to put like popcorn theater through me and an intravenous just to keep me alive, right? Like that's me. But the industry's just changed, and I think we're gonna see a lot more of that happen. The streaming services are gonna dominate and continue to take over, and I think we're gonna see more of them.
So when can we expect Recreating 1912 to
I'm
come
hoping
out?
to do a premiere in probably April. And what we'll be doing is we'll be doing a variety of film festivals first, and then we'll most likely take it to a limited number of screens, North America to start with, but also London, because I've got connections there that want to already see this. And then we'll see where we go from there, but obviously some streaming services too. We'll be talking to them as well.
Is there a target audience?
You know what's interesting is I want to say that it's film nerds like me. Movie nerds. I think that's it, right? Like people who just really appreciate cinema. But hopefully, again, we go well beyond that. I think if we look at kind of some of the films that might be considered sort of contemporary examples, you know, we see a lot of shorts that are often not dialogue driven, but music driven and you know, emotional kind of fun rides like that. We see that, you know, for example, you can see a ton of these on Disney Plus. They've got a lot of those. So I think there is a contemporary audience for this. But I don't know, I'm building this for me. I'm the audience. I just want to see if we can do it, right? So I'm excited. It'll be cool.
That's fantastic. And I do have one more question. It's what inspired you? And I may have touched it, but I want to know now that since we've had a chance to talk about it, what is it that inspired you to say, I want to tackle this, aside from saying, I want to do it for myself?
Yeah, I'd say there's really two things. So here's one of the things. Like when I grew up, obviously, like most people, I was watching all the blockbuster movies that came out. I've got so many that are my favorites. In fact, probably one of my all-time favorite movies, beginning to end, is Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like I love those kind of films. And then I went to film school, and they introduced me to a ton of movies that I'd never heard of before, especially older movies. And you know, it was interesting that they gave us a list of about 100 movies we had to watch. And one of the oldest was Birth of a Nation, which I don't know if you're familiar with that show, but way, way back, early silent film, black and white. And then everything all the way up through, you know, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, all the old Alfred Hitchcock stuff, all of these things. And wow, it just made me realize that, you know, I had really only seen like a sliver of what the motion picture world had to offer. Like the history of films, there was so many incredible gems and treasures that I had just never heard of. And so it's kind of like, you know, someone had been feeding me vanilla ice cream my whole life, and all of a sudden I got to Baskin Robbins and there's 31 flavors I didn't know about, and man, this is just crazy. So I'm kind of hoping that people get a sense of that too, and maybe it reignites even such an interest to see these older films. And then I think for me, having done a lot of stunt work, the other thing that was just so impressive, I'm still in awe now, especially as I'm watching Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd are my two favorites. But the stuff that they were able to create and pull off, you know, just in real time, really doing those stunts. They actually did what you see on the camera in most cases. That I just want to see if I could do some of this stuff too. Right? Perfect.
Well, thank you so much for taking us back in time. It's Douglas Vermeeren talking about recreating 1912. Thank you so much for joining us.